Thank you for taking the time to attend this afternoon's webinar. It's on Migrating to Infor CloudSuite Public Sector. Very exciting presentation for you today. And with that, I give you Joe and Richard.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So, Joe, I'm really excited today to talk to you, to have you here, and to be able to talk to you about some of the considerations that our public sector client base needs to think through in terms of overall cloud enterprise strategy, how Infor CloudSuite FSM and Infor CloudSuite HCM can fit into that strategy, and some next steps for making that, getting started on that journey.
Great, be happy to share that information.
Great. So let's start out in general just by talking a bit about cloud and what are some of the unique aspects of cloud software for organizations that are local, municipal, or county or state governments, that are utility providers, transportation authorities, public schools, all the different types of organization that fall under the umbrella of
the public sector.
Public sector. We see a number of drivers out among our client base that are encouraging them to adopt a cloud strategy, and some of those are the increasing complexity in maintaining on-premise systems, right? And if we look at, for those customers that have been on Lawson a while and have upgraded their system from 7 to 8 to 9 to 10, I think each and every upgrade has increased the count of servers that's involved, the number of different elements that become a part of the solution. And as we move forward to even more advanced systems that are taking advantage of things like machine learning and artificial intelligence, we move beyond an IT infrastructure that's feasible for much of our client base to maintain.
Right, and the organization spends less time worrying about the technology and actually using the technology.
Yeah, and worrying about that technology is pretty expensive.
Yes, it
right?
is.
So being able to transfer that cost to a subscription license certainly has been a driver.
Right.
Also, one of a couple of things that our clients identify as helping them make the case for cloud are the increased security that they find within the cloud space.
Right.
Not having to worry about an on-premise server or data center potentially getting hacked or a data breach. Right. Because as we know, Infor CloudSuite solutions are built on Amazon Web Services, which is one of the most secure platforms.
With extremely high uptimes.
Exactly.
And reliability.
Yes, and exactly. So there's data security and preventing a breach, preventing or reducing the exposure to a potential hack, such as a ransomware attack.
Right.
Right. And then in general, overall uptime. Not having to maintain backup systems in case of a failover. Having applications that are running in AWS that might be replicated across a number of different availability zones. Without having to maintain all that backup infrastructure on premise. So those are some of the common drivers that we see. Now, our conversation today is really going to focus on multi-tenant cloud applications.
Right.
And what that means, I'm talking about a single application that is shared across multiple customers. However, although it's a single instance of the application that's accessed by potentially many different clients, each client does maintain their own database and their own discrete set of data.
Right.
Sort of underlying that.
With full security related to that data.
Yeah, exactly. So the multi-tenant cloud, or really the true cloud-based delivery, differs somewhat from just traditional hosting, where a client has a dedicated instance of an application. One of the changes that we see with a multi-tenant cloud strategy as compared to on-premise or hosted model is the way that the applications are updated from the software vendor, right? This is one of the big changes. I think although initially this change can be a little intimidating, I know that of our client base that has adopted a continuous update model, I would say that all of them would say they're in a much better place today, being able to enjoy being on the latest version of the application, being on a consistent version across the entire customer base, which means you don't have as many unique aspects to your software that make it harder to support and maintain, and also eliminating the need for the large effort that goes into yearly or cyclical minor or major upgrades.
And the client also enjoys more timely updates.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Since the changes are more incremental in nature, they can be rolled out more quickly, which means faster access to new innovations.
Now, Richard, when the applications are published, the updates are published monthly, does not mean they need to be implemented in the same frequency that they are published, does it?
Well, that's a great question. The answer is that it kind of depends on what that change is. So that's on a case-by-case basis. In general, application updates and technology foundational updates, they will be published into the system monthly, and that's generally not something that end user can opt out of or defer because it's a change to the application or platform that's shared across the entire client base. However, Infor does make available certain cases where there's going to be a change to an application that that Infor knows might need to be managed on the client side, and therefore they'll build in some capability to have the client control the timing of that switch or potentially defer that change.
Okay.
Conversely, they might make an update optionally available for some time that a customer could take in advance of it, rolling out automatically.
So basically, maintenance updates and fix updates are applied, but new capability updates are at the discretion of turning them on or not?
I think that's a good general rule of thumb, because you could think of it as anything that you need to implement in order to use. Infor wants to make that a workable solution and not just have that appear. Have that change occur automatically without giving customers a chance to respond to that and really, properly implement what that change is.
Right. Okay.
So let's, we talked about some of the drivers of why public sector organizations are moving to cloud. What are some of the things that have held these organizations back in the past from adopting a cloud strategy? There have been concerns around the security and privacy of data, right? And particularly when it comes to public sector, I think we have to realize that there might be regulations in place around where data can be housed. Luckily, Amazon is a big player in the public sector space, and they have architected their solutions to allow tenant applications to meet those requirements. So if we look at, for example, for federal compliance, there's the AWS GovCloud that Infor has been building upon for FedRAMP certification. Just in general, you do an AWS customer has control over which regions their data is stored in, and we know that for CloudSuite Financials and CloudSuite HCM customers that are homed within the United States, their data will always remain within the United States in US-based data centers. Just some of the other barriers to cloud adoption, we could touch on, if we, often when making the case to move to cloud, there's some level of value analysis that's done that talks about reducing the on-premise IT footprint and what those cost savings are. But of course, if an organization has already invested in a server farm to run those systems and maybe already has administrators on staff, moving just a portion of their IT portfolio to the cloud isn't necessarily going to make that server farm no longer necessary or have the availability to reduce IT staffing. So that makes that value analysis challenging.
Okay.
Some of the other things that we've seen maybe border more on myth or misconception, such as not having access to data, or the not being able to configure the application to meet customer-specific business needs.
Right.
So we'll get into a little bit about that as we discuss Infor's solution for public sector. So I think if there's one thing I can say about Infor's approach to cloud, it's they're 100% all in, right? Infor is fully aligned behind a cloud-first strategy. And we see that in that they've made their entire portfolio of public sector applications available in the cloud. And we know that's a massive undertaking because we're talking about a very wide application footprint that might involve a lot of different technologies and a lot of different kinds of application servers. For anybody that's maintained a portfolio of IT applications on-premise, that might involve Linux servers, Windows servers, Oracle DB2, SQL Server, all sorts of different systems that need to work together in concert. And Infor's CloudSuite solution helps solve or reduce some of that complexity.
Right.
In that, we can subscribe to CloudSuite Financials as supply management, CloudSuite HCM, and they integrate well with other applications commonly used across the public sector community, such as enterprise asset management, expense management, Hansen. And Infor has gone ahead and given all of those applications a consistent look and feel. So end users feel that they're accessing one coherent, cohesive solution rather than disparate applications.
Right.
If we look at some of the capabilities of Infor CloudSuite, we've talked about a lot of these in other presentations. I think one of the most exciting things that I'm seeing is that beyond just moving where applications are hosted from, Infor is truly leveraging some of the unique capabilities that we have with cloud by building upon solutions within the AWS portfolio. And if we take a look at Infor Data Lake or Infor Coleman, those are features that directly capitalize or leverage Amazon services and adapt them for practical use among our customer base. And without those baseline offerings from Amazon, it just wouldn't be possible to have that kind of capability, say, in an on-premise application.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about what are the roles and responsibilities, in a cloud, when subscribing to cloud-based applications. So specifically with Infor, it's still necessary to have an application administrator role on staff. Just because you're moving the system to the cloud doesn't mean it administers itself all of a sudden. And some of the duties or responsibilities of that application administrator would be user security, so maintaining who has access to the system, and then what the security model is. So once a user is in the system, what are the different data and functions that that user has access to. And then, of course, all of the customer-developed items remain a customer responsibility in terms of, custom workflow, integrations with other systems, custom reports, anything of that nature. Now, the responsibilities that we can shift over to Infor Cloud Ops when subscribing to CloudSuite include the low-level system administration, generally the responsibility for keeping the system up and available, and then maintaining all the virtual hardware infrastructure underlying that. When it comes to data access, I would say that any data that's housed within CloudSuite is actually highly accessible, highly available to customers. I mean, customers maintain ownership over that data. It's still their data and they can still get at. But the tools and techniques that we use are different in a cloud scenario. So if you're used to making a connection, a SQL connection to a database server and manipulating database tables directly, that changes. And instead, we take advantage of the application gateways that are available through CloudSuite. For example, every business class, every bit of data within CloudSuite can be made accessible through standard web services and secured through standard web services. So we can define what kinds of data is accessible via which web service endpoints. And that makes it, because they're standards-based and because they're available in the cloud and not hidden behind an on-premise firewall, that makes integration with other systems a lot easier. And there are quite a number of tools baked into Infor OS that make it easy to move data in and out of Infor and do data analysis and reporting.
Okay.
So, Joe, will you take us through what are the steps that public sector organizations should start thinking about to get started on this journey?
Be happy to, Richard. Thank you. As Richard has explained, we've gone through the cloud and the specifics of the cloud. Let's talk a little bit more about the steps to moving to the cloud. Now, what you see here is typical 9 steps that we think about as we move from our current application, our current on-prem or single-tenant to the multi-tenant cloud. First of all, as with most projects, it requires executive commitment by the executive and leadership team that this is part of what's on the strategic application roadmap. It is something that wants to happen within their current environment. The next step is to assess the current systems and business strategies to look at what you currently have in place, an inventory of what the systems represent and any sorts of business process changes that are necessary to make the migration project a success. Mm-hmm. In addition to that, you evaluate the new capabilities of the version 11 software, compare that to the current version you're on, look at anything that needs to be considered as part of expanding, if you will, the application footprint of the V11 capabilities. In addition to that, the step 4 is realign for success if required. What that means is that you want your business processes to be in place or at least reviewed for success when you migrate to the V11 software. So that's an important thing to consider. And then step 5 is finalizing the deployment schedule, depending on the modules and the work streams involved. Is it phased, multi-phase, single phase? What comes first? Finance, HR, the age-old decision of...
Everything you've been talking about so far really goes into project scoping, right?
Project scoping, right.
Really putting the boundaries of what...
Putting the boundaries and identifying, if you will, the cost and cost savings of migrating to the cloud. And that leads to step 6 there, which is securing the funding. You can only secure the funding once you know the cost and the cost implications of moving to the cloud. What follows after secured funding is vendor selection, negotiate and procure, and then obviously start the CloudSuite implementation. Now, from a perspective of strategic initiative, as I mentioned a little bit a moment ago, The CloudSuite migration needs to be part of your strategic business roadmap. It's imperative that you identify in that CloudSuite migration what pieces and parts need to integrate into that overall roadmap. And most of the organizations do have a 3-year, 5-year, 8-year strategic roadmap. So the CloudSuite migration needs to figure into that. In addition to that, as I mentioned earlier, detailed assessment of the current applications. That's important. That's a strategic initiative. It goes and looks at the application roadmap and identifies which components stay, which components are replaced. In addition to doing that, it allows you to calculate the cost savings and return of investment necessary to secure the funding required to move the project forward. And in that process, we're defining the future scope and capabilities going forward with the version 11 software. One of the biggest, and Richard, you can add to this, is that there's a tremendously more capable workflow and reporting, especially with the burst in place, that the version 11 allows you over the prior versions, and that addresses the customizations perhaps related to reporting or data extracts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think amongst our public sector clients, there are a lot of unique, mandatory reporting requirements that need to be accommodated in CloudSuite and made as part of the Wave 1 Go Live.
Right, exactly. Now, as we talk about the executive commitment, it's really engaging the business users from the executives down to the folks that are actually using the system. And it's part of that process is discovery, identifying what components, what areas of improvement are necessary. We keep going back to business process. This is a time to look at the business processes currently in place, evaluate them and understand them, moving forward from that perspective. New system capabilities, part of that involves understanding what V11 the CloudSuite V11 software package can provide in terms of additional capabilities beyond your prior or your previous versions, and documenting the pain points of the current system, making sure they're incorporated and addressed as you move forward in the migration project. And most importantly, it's listing the prioritizations, right? What's the most important? Organizations have different priorities in terms of what and why they're moving to the cloud, so that all needs to be addressed. The second part of this, engaging the business users, is assessing the organizational skills, and what that represents is having an assessment of your current staff's capabilities, from developers, project managers, change management. There are a lot of moving pieces and parts and components within a migration to the CloudSuite, and it's very important to understand your current staff skill sets and capabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll determine how much work an organization can take on internally versus bringing in consultants. And also, it also sets the pace for how well an organization will be able to maintain and continue enhancement of a system after go live.
Exactly, and the last two bullets here on the slide is that experience, capacity, and availability will impact the vendor costs. The more the organization is able to provide those critical resources, the lower the cost of the implementation, the migration. And most importantly, knowledgeable and experienced decision makers on the client side. It's very important that decisions made are decisions kept, that if you don't have that authority, accountability, and empowerment, you'll see shifting scope and change requests. So it's really allocating your best and brightest to the project to ensure the success of the project. Now, when we talk about migrating from Lawson or your current Lawson environment, the complexity of migration is really influenced by a number of things. The level of business process change that you currently have in place. Sometimes the implementation has been cut short some of the optimized business processes as we strive to, for the prior version, try to get it in on time and on budget. Compromises have been made. So it's a time to reevaluate business processes drive the application configuration, and sometimes there are things that may have been left out or need to be reinvestigated. So, so that impacts the complexity of the migration. If your business processes are known, current, and up to date, less time is involved in reevaluating that. Also, the level of customization that you have done to satisfy your business process requirements, your reporting requirements, those kinds of things, your integration requirements, that will drive the complexity of the migration. More complex, the more things you need to cover there. And maybe, Richard, you can talk to the level of data structures transformation. From that perspective, what do you see there in terms of complexity?
Yeah, absolutely. Two big areas that will drive transformation would be any change in GL structure, so a chart of accounts change or change the way companies are organized. Generally, we want to do this either to better align our financial structure to our actual business or to potentially improve the outcomes of Infor delivered reporting, because if data is captured in such a way that it's better organized and optimized for reporting, then it's much easier to get that data out and analyze it the way we want to. We'll see that both on the finance and on the HR side. And then, of course, that level of data transformation is going to create a mapping from the old structures to the new structures, and then any sort of transaction history that we want to bring forward from Lawson is going to need to run through that mapping.
Okay, thank you. Also, as previously mentioned, new application functionality that now could be put into scope. It's important to identify it at the beginning of the project and identify those from a level of complexity, time frame, capabilities. And we'll get into that.
For example, talent management, right? There's quite a wide breadth of application functionality in CloudSuite HCM regarding talent management that really has no equivalent over on the Lawson side. So depending on which of those modules an organization is seeking to implement, that could have a great effect on the migration project.
And lastly, the timing of retirement systems. When do they, as new capabilities are implemented in the V11 or identified to be implemented, what is the timing of the retirement of those legacy systems and the number of legacy systems?
Right, and those could be point solutions that might be replaced by bringing that functionality into CloudSuite, or that might mean Lawson itself. If Lawson is on a legacy hosting provider and you're seeking to end the cost of maintaining that contract.
Right, exactly. Now, on this slide here, this is just an example of a project roadmap, and it shows both the HCM 11 and the financial version 11 implementations here. This is just an example of a way to implement, whether it's single phase, multi-phase. You have wave 1, wave 2. This is one of the most important aspects in the planning of migration to CloudSuite. Is exactly the sequencing, the timing, and the, if you will, the retirement of the legacy systems to support this migration. So a majority of the planning cycle is getting to this particular representation so that as you go out to RFP, as you select the vendors, it's very clear from the organization's perspective on how they want to roll out the migration.
Yeah, I mean, here on this slide alone, we see a great number of application functionality that's in scope here for an overall program. This program might last 3 or 4 years and might include several discrete projects of 1 year or 18 months in duration each. This is not something that you want to be figuring out once a CloudSuite implementation project is underway. This is definitely something you want to have agreement on prior to assembling and bringing in a project team.
Right, and most importantly, if you are to issue an RFP as part of the procurement, you need to state this up front so the vendor responses can be very clear on the cost associated with whatever roadmap or whatever implementation schedule you have in place. Now let's talk a little bit about timeframes and readiness. This by no means shows everything that needs to happen. This is just kind of identifying high-level tasks. But, and it's based on the organization's complexity, what they're trying to accomplish in that migration, how much business process change is involved. But from a representation perspective, if you're ready to start a CloudSuite implementation, you would have completed all of the items here listed in developing the approach. Those are all the planning aspects. The success of the migration is really based on two aspects, planning and analysis. And ultimately, the goal here is to get to developing an RFP if that's required. In most cases, it is required for public sector procurements. But you want to first strategically identify what you're trying to accomplish. You then want to identify the project timeline, as we spoke, the resource requirements. Again, that drives the vendor costs. And then the funding. If the funding is secured, in most instances it is secured. Sometimes it is secured as part of that procurement process. And then the procure and implement, if you do the complete job of developing the approach and getting into the specifics, the better the RFP that is issued, the more that it's clear, concise, the more relevant the responses will be, the more the costs will truly align to what will eventually happen.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work involved in getting to that point of getting the vendors.
Absolutely. I mean, Joe, you and I have looked at a lot of RFPs, right? We've done a lot of RFP responses, and an RFP process is very structured and very controlled in terms of communication between the different vendors involved and the procuring organization.
Right.
And if the organization doesn't have a very clear idea of what they're looking to accomplish within a project, it can be very challenging to work out those details through a structured, question and answer
Right.
process with an RFP. And I worry then in those circumstances that an organization really isn't able to do a good apples-to-apples comparison because each vendor has interpreted the requirements differently.
Right.
So the more that an organization could do to clarify what is in scope, what is out of scope, and put some real numbers and metrics to that, I think the better they're going to find comparing RFP responses will go.
Right, you're absolutely correct there. And in our travels, we have seen hundreds of pages of RFPs that was less informative than a 60-page RFP. It really comes down to the relevant information that's necessary to help create a very cost-effective response. So again, there's a lot here that's involved in getting ready for a CloudSuite implementation. The last line on this chart, there's a lot of things in front of it, and most everyone will understand that and realize that.
Yeah.
Okay. Next, how can we help? Well, we've talked a little bit about the implementation roadmap, the strategic roadmap is what I meant, and how we eventually get to that development or deployment schedule, right? So we can provide help in that arena. We can provide assistance in helping an organization understand how the Infor Cloud migration fits into your strategic initiatives from that perspective. We also have the ability to help you assess your business processes in leveraging that technology around V11. We have what we call a V11 pre-planning, and there's webinars that we have completed.
Yeah, we just did one.
Specifically on that. We just did one.
Yeah.
That gets into the specifics that we've talked about through this presentation and getting that information necessary to have a clear and more concise understanding of what a V11 migration involves and what it can involve. Is there anything you'd like to add about the pre-planning component?
Yeah, I will say that there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to embarking upon a long CloudSuite project in terms of what is the scope and what are the costs, and there's a lot of effort to contain that.
Right.
Going through a pre-planning engagement is going to give you a way to define your parameters for your project, and the pre-planning engagement that RPI offers has a very tightly defined scope and has a very predictable cost.
Okay.
So we think it's a worthy investment for our clients to take on that will pay off in a better managed and a better controlled CloudSuite implementation.
Okay. And to wrap it up, we at RPI are ready to become your public sector partner throughout the cloud migration journey as you need us. Hopefully I have conveyed that there are a lot of steps, a lot of complexity to a CloudSuite migration, but it's all very manageable. It's all very straightforward, that the better the planning, the better the execution.
Yep, absolutely.
Is what it comes down to. Do we?
Well, thank you. I want to give everyone an opportunity to ask questions. If you type them into the GoToWebinar questions slot. In the meantime, I will carry one forward from our previous presentation,
Okay.
which is, have we seen any local governments move to the multi-tenant?
Yeah. RPI is engaged in a couple of different projects right now,
Yes, we are.
bringing city governments and county governments to CloudSuite. And it's certainly a proven solution. The Multi-Tenant Cloud is a proven solution for local governments at this point.
And school districts.
Yes, and as Bill mentioned,
And utilities?
school districts, and yes, and Joe is very involved in a utilities project at this moment.
At this very moment, that's doing a combined financial and HCM implementation to V11.